Hello everyone, welcome back to the Mozilla Firefly channel. Last week I did a little deep dive into what's going on in Bangladesh, and since a few other things have come up over the last week, I thought I would do a news update for what's going on in Bangladesh. It is extremely hot today, so if I'm sounding frustrated, please know that it is about the subject matter and it is definitely about the heat. I think when I complain about the weather in London, like it's 25 degrees today, people go, oh, you can't handle any amount of heat. It's not about the heat, it's about the air. The air in London does not move, and it is quite insufferable. But I'm going to do my best today, and I've picked some articles, and as we did last time, I've picked articles from sources that are generally widely accepted to be accredited and trustworthy. I apologize in advance for my misreads. All the articles that I use will be cited in the description below. I will also read the name of the article as well as the day it was published, so that you can check for yourself. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in the last video and the video before that, my editor is on holiday. He is on holiday for 2 months, so all of the videos that release in July and August, if I do many more in July and August, will probably not be very heavily edited, if edited at all, because I don't have an editor at the moment. He's on holiday, and I hope he's having a wonderful time. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video is because there's been media blackouts as well as like internet blackouts in Bangladesh, and also the media in Bangladesh is being heavily censored through political nonsense and censorship. So this would, at least on a small scale, provide some people a reliable source to come to understand what's going on in Bangladesh, especially if you're not in Bangladesh at the moment, because if you're in Bangladesh at the moment, oh my god, I wish the best for you. I hope you're safe, and I hope you're keeping safe, and if you are joining the protests, you're taking all the measures and precautions you need to be safe. Please be safe. I know it's super unsafe, but please be safe. Alright, I just want to reiterate probably the most important point from the last video at the beginning of this as well, and that is that the two political parties that have the most power in Bangladesh, the Awami League Party and the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party, the BNP and the Awami League, neither of those parties are very good. They are both known to have used political violence as well as political censorship in the past, especially to run, campaigning for votes and stuff like that. The parties are also charged and accused of using political violence against each other. Jamaat-e-Islami is in there as well, but those two parties that will be brought up a lot when it comes to Bangladeshi politics, neither of them are good. Both of them have oppressed the larger population of Bengali people, Bangladeshi people, and yeah, I just want everyone to understand that Bangladesh is very much in a political deadlock when it comes to the ruling parties that people can elect with their democratic vote. So to start off, this video was researched on the 30th of July, so yesterday, and it's being recorded today on the 31st of July. I haven't done any research since yesterday, so anything that comes out past the 30th of July, I do not know about. I will not include in this video because I don't have the research for it. But I'm using articles that came out last week that covered some of the student protest stuff, but also the stuff that happened after the student protest, after the curfew, after the blackouts. So I'm going to start with this article from The Independent that is called "Why Thousands of Students Have Taken to the Streets in Deadly Protests in Bangladesh." This was published on Tuesday, 23rd July 2024. Police in Bangladesh arrested around 2,400 people during its crackdown on anti-quota protesters following days of violence that killed at least 174 across the country, reports said. The country remained under curfew for the third day in a row on Tuesday, this Tuesday just gone, as internet and telecom services stayed suspended to quell rising anger among people over the employment quotas in government jobs. Now, a lot of people, I'm going to go back and forth a little bit, a lot of people did ask me what these employment quotas were about. There is a little section in this article that explains it quite well, so we'll get to that in a moment. For the moment, just humour me with the general landscape of Bangladesh, how things have been going recently. The country saw its worst unrest in a decade after hundreds of thousands of students took to the streets for protests that spilled into deadly violence after a counter-protest by a students' group backed by the ruling Awami League party attacked the protesters. Local reports suggested that the death toll could be much higher, but a communication blackout has prevented information from trickling out of the embattled nation. The situation was mostly calm in the capital Dhaka on Tuesday and most major cities for a second day after the Supreme Court ordered the controversial quota system for the government jobs to be scaled back. We'll also go into a little more depth about that in a moment. However, the security situation was still not entirely under control, the army chief who toured the capital by helicopter on Tuesday morning told reporters. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government was set to formally accept the court ruling to cut quotas for government jobs. The protesters have given an ultimatum of 48 hours to the government for their demands to be met. The students group have put up 8 demands, including a public apology to them from Miss Hasina and the reopening of university campuses shut when the violence began. These demands will go over towards the end of this video because I have a list of them, but it's in the final article that I've used in this. One of the last ones. So stick around. I will go into depth about that. A UAE court, this is happening in UAE, this was like insane when I heard about this. A UAE court sentenced 57 Bangladeshi nationals to prison for staging demonstrations in the Gulf country in solidarity with student protesters back home. 3 of them were sentenced to life in prison, 53 to 10 years each, and 1 to 11 years for gathering. And it's so I'm having such a hard time reading this. So 3 of these 57 protesters were sentenced to life in prison. 53 of them were sentenced to 10 years each, and 1 of them was sentenced to 11 years for gathering and inciting riots, according to a state news agency. UAE is a sus country. I don't know why anyone stands by UAE or like talks about it like it's such a like forward-thinking modern nation that does everything right. Like, it's 57 people were arrested and charged and sentenced to prison for, you know, varying amounts of time. Some of them were sent to life in prison for protesting. Anyway, carrying on. Miss Hasina doubled down on her claims that her political opponents were behind the protests that were the sternest to challenge her 15 years in power. Now, as likely as that is, that's also not surprising for Sheikh Hasina to say. Like, it's amazing that both parties, actually, both the Awami League and the BNP, will blame each other when people start to protest and people start to demand things from the government. They'll blame each other for fueling the opposition because they both like use political violence against each other. Like, I don't know what the deal is, but it's not a politically healthy situation for these two parties to continue doing this. I really don't get it. As international condemnation poured in, she said she was forced to impose a curfew for public safety. I never wanted it, she said on Monday in a meeting in Dhaka. We will lift the curfew whenever the situation gets better. we'll talk about the curfew. I've got a section on the curfew coming up in a little bit. Let's go over why the students are protesting. I know we covered it in the last video, but just to make sure all my bases are covered. Students had taken to the streets demanding an end to a quota system that reserves up to 30% of government jobs for relatives of veterans who fought in Bangladesh's War of Independence in 1971 against Pakistan. The protests began late last month, but tensions escalated last week when students at Dhaka University, the country's largest, clashed with police and a counter-protest inflamed the situation. Students alleged that the protests were peaceful until the student wing of the ruling Awami League attacked the protesters. The fresh clashes from the bloodiest day of the protest to date, which led to the deaths of 22 people on 18th of July, mostly undergraduate students, as protesters attempted to impose a complete shutdown in the country. At least 2 journalists were among those killed during the violence. I am shot at but will continue my work after dressing at the hospital, wrote journalist Muqtadir Rashid on X/Twitter. I don't know. I talked about this a bit in my the video I made about Palestine, and like, killing of journalists, the intentional killing of journalists is literally a war crime. Whoever is responsible for the deaths of these journalists, if they are funded or backed by either of these political parties, the BNP or the Awami League, most likely the Awami League, because they were using the Shatra League, the Bangladeshi Shatra League, to like attack students as well. Like, if it's found that this is in connection to either of those political parties, you've committed war crimes. Just stop it. Just stop it. So let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court order that I mentioned before earlier in this article. So on Sunday, the Sunday just gone, the Supreme Court ordered that 93% of government jobs would be allocated on merit and 5% would be for veterans who served in the war. The remaining 2% will be for members of ethnic minorities and transgender and disabled people. The decision was a partial win for the students after representatives from both sides met late on Friday to discuss a resolution. Law Minister Anisul Haq had said the government was open to discussing their demands. So, to give a little bit of context, Ms. Hasina's government had halted the job quotas following mass student protests in 2018. But last month, a High Court ruling nullified that decision and reinstated the quotas after relatives of the 1971 veterans filed petitions. So this is escalation of a ruling that was overturned recently because of what happened in 2018, when students already protested about this not being a thing, that 30% of government jobs be reserved for only the family members of veterans that fought in 1971 in the Independence War. However, the court order was unlikely to quell the opposition-backed protest, which was fueled by the rise in inequality and unemployment at a time when Bangladesh's economy continues to suffer. At least 4 protest coordinators told the BBC that they planned to continue their action until they secured the release of some detained student leaders and the restoration of internet and other cellular services. The judgment of the Supreme Court seems unclear to us. There is no clear-cut solution for all types of quotas, said Abdul Qadir, one of the coordinators. I'm just checking something quickly. Yeah, we're still fine. I'm just making sure I'm dotting all my I's and crossing all my T's. It's hard to do it when you don't have an editor at your beck and call. He's so good. Please leave a little heart emoji for my editor in the comments. I miss you. Please come back to the channel. I know you're on holiday. I hope you're enjoying it, but please come back soon. So, after hearing about the Supreme Court order, what has happened so far? Thousands of people have been injured, and hospitals were filled up to capacity as protests demanding the removal of a quota system turned violent last week. Protesting students clashed with the security forces, who lobbed tear gas and rubber bullets at them. Foreign nations, including India, one of Bangladesh's strongest allies, issued travel advisories for its residents as Dhaka looked like a war zone over the weekend. Germany warned its citizens against travelling to Bangladesh as further restrictions and deterioration of the situation are to be expected. New Delhi said over 4,500 Indian students have returned home over the past few days. It has also said 500 Nepalese students and 38 from Bhutan had arrived in the country. On Tuesday, Malaysia became the largest nation to evacuate citizens from the South Asian country, with the Foreign Ministry saying a flight bringing them home was set to arrive in Kuala Lumpur, the capital. The government declared Monday a public holiday to encourage people to stay at home, with only emergency services allowed to operate. A shoot-on-sight order was also in place, along with the curfew, giving security forces the authority to fire on mobs in extreme cases, said lawmaker Obaidul Qadir, the General Secretary I can't say that word, the General Secretary of the ruling Awami League Party. The government has decided to impose a curfew and deploy the military in aid of the civilian authorities. A government spokesperson said late on Friday. How is imposing a curfew and deploying the military in service of the civilians in your country when largely the military is responsible for all these injuries and deaths? Like, I don't get it. I truly don't understand. Major government websites, including this is just something else that happened. Major government websites, including of the central bank and the Prime Minister's office, appear to have been targeted by hackers, a group which called itself the Resistance. The Resistance with the E's as threes instead of E's, was reported to be behind the hacking. Operation Hunt Down Stop Killing Students. It is said in identical messages on both sites seen on Friday, adding in bright red font, "It's not a protest anymore, it's a war now." Most television news channels in Bangladesh were off the air last week after thousands of protesters stormed the headquarters. Yep. Busy. Thank you. Stormed the headquarters of the state broadcaster BTV, vandalized furniture, smashed windows, and set fire to parts of the building. Apologies, that was my partner just checking on me because I've been a little sick. But that doesn't matter. We're reading the news. What is the quota system? A good question. A question that a lot of people have asked me. As well as reserving nearly a third of government jobs for family members of veterans of the 1971 War of Independence, the quota system also reserves government jobs for women, disabled people, and members of ethnic minorities. However, students have mainly protested against jobs reserved for veterans' families, which they claim benefits mostly supporters of Miss Hasina, whose Awami League Party led the independence movement. So the Awami League Party were the ones to lead the independence war and like declare Bangladesh as an independent country, which is probably why there's such a kerfuffle about it, because a lot of bizarre language has been used to sort of demonize the protesters and the students, when the students especially have nothing to do with the 1971 independence war. Like, they are babies. I'm sorry, I'm 29, but like, I know a lot of students who are like under 18, just slightly over that hill, like just about 21, 22, 23, something like this. They are babies. They weren't involved in the 1971 War of Independence, and honestly, the war wounds from that time shouldn't really be brought up as a sticking point to students who are upset that they can't get employed into good jobs. Like, it just seems not that relevant to what the students are protesting about. The protesters have called on the government to abolish the quota for being discriminatory against the students struggling amid high unemployment in a country where some 32 million young people are now in work or education. Sorry, I've misread that. I've misread that completely. The protesters have called on the government to abolish the quota for being discriminatory against the students struggling amid high unemployment in a country where some 32 million young people are not in work or education. Even though job opportunities have grown in some parts of the private sector, many people prefer government jobs because they are seen as more stable and more lucrative. We have to look out for ourselves and our future generations. We need jobs in this country. We are already suffering from the lack of it, said Alam Rashid, a student from Dhaka. We have invited the government to have a conversation with us multiple times. Instead, Sheikh Hasina just unleashed her police force on us, he told The Independent. Miss Hasina is the daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the man who led Bangladesh to independence. She has defended the quota system, saying that veterans deserve the highest respect for their contributions in the war, regardless of their political affiliation. She previously labelled those opposing the quota system as Razakar or Rajakar, or volunteers, a term used for those who allegedly collaborated with the Pakistani army during the 1971 war. Miss Hasina was forced to call in the army to maintain order as paramilitary and police failed to curtail the violence. According to reports, rights groups have accused the police of using brute force against the protesters after bullet injuries were found on the body of a 25-year-old university student this week. Backed by the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, the students have so far refused to back down. We were protesting peacefully until we were attacked by the goons. It is our right to continue protesting. It is embedded in the history of this country, and we shall continue to do so for our right. A Dhaka University student who did not want to be named for fear of persecution told The Independent. The Awami League and the BNP have often accused each other of fueling political chaos and violence, which is... I brought this up earlier. Most recently, ahead of the country's national election, which was marred by a crackdown on several opposition figures, while Hasina's government accused the party of attempting to disrupt the vote. I urge all freedom-loving citizens of Bangladesh to stand beside the ongoing movement, said Tariq Rahman, the chair of the BNP. Please take Tariq Rahman's words with a pinch of salt. He's not really that much better than Sheikh Hasina. Like, he really isn't. I'm going to read what he said anyway, but just to put in my own opinion, please take whatever he says just with a grain of salt, because the BNP is not much better than the Awami League. Don't. I urge all freedom-loving citizens of Bangladesh to stand beside the ongoing movement, said Tariq Rahman, the chair of BNP. Sheikh Hasina must resign for conducting a mass murder, killing hundreds of brave souls, our brothers, sisters and children, in the last 6 days and many more in the past. She must be put on trial for committing crimes against humanity, he added. I wouldn't throw stones from glass houses, Tariq. You literally live in the UK because of the criminal convictions you carry from what you did in Bangladesh, from what your party has done in Bangladesh. So I would not cast stones from a glass house. Earlier in the week, the government suspended university classes indefinitely and asked students to vacate the dorms immediately. What is unfolding in Bangladesh is deeply unsettling for a generation that only asked for a fair opportunity in public service recruitment. That a peaceful protest against a state policy would slip into the peak of lawlessness shows that the government's lack of farsightedness. Trying to make a video. I don't know if you can hear that. It's so fucking annoying living next to this street, and it's too hot to close the window. I'll start over. What is unfolding in Bangladesh is deeply unsettling for a generation that only asked for a fair opportunity in public service recruitment. That a peaceful protest against a state policy would slip into the peak of lawlessness shows the government's lack of farsightedness and inefficient policy governance, said Saad Hamidi, policy and advocacy manager at the Canada-based Balsillie School of International Affairs. The internet shutdown makes matters worse. Local news sites are inaccessible, and people in the country are left incommunicado with the rest of the world, all in the pretext of conducting sweeping operations by the state that have often resulted in serious human rights violations, he told the Associated Press, or the AP. The US and the UN have raised concerns about the ongoing protests and have called for restraint from all sides. Can the US just please sit down? Next up, we have an article from Al Jazeera that was published on 21st July 2024, titled "How Peaceful Bangladesh Quota Protests Morphed into Nationwide Unrest." So there's going to be a little bit of repetition, but this article goes into a bit more of what happened during the curfew and the crackdown, as well as the internet blackouts that happened across the country. So bear with me, there will be a slight amount of repetition, but hopefully once the editor is back and he can edit this properly, it will be a lot more consumable. I should stop apologizing. I've already said it one too many times. On Sunday, the Supreme Court scrapped most of the quotas, saying that 93% of government jobs will now be based on merit. But student leaders have pledged to carry on with the protests, demanding the release of jailed protesters and the resignation of officials, including Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan, who they say are responsible for the violence that left at least 131 people dead. Al Jazeera spoke to medics and a network of journalists to compile a death toll, as authorities have not released casualty figures so far. Prothom Alo and the Daily Star, the two largest Bengali language and English dailies, have reported 146 and 127 deaths respectively. More than 70% of the deaths have been reported from Dhaka, where streets are strewn with the remnants of thousands of rounds of tear gas shells, sound grenades, shotgun pellets, rubber bullets, and brick chunks. Aside from 2 policemen and 2 ruling party supporters, all of the deceased are either students or ordinary people. Curfew and crackdown. As violence escalated, the government imposed a curfew from Friday at midnight for an indefinite period, with intermittent gaps of 2 hours so that people could stock up on essentials. The government also deployed the army in order to prevent the violence from spreading amid accusations of excessive use of force by the police against protesters. The police are doing too much damage to the civilian population, so guess what? We're going to summon the army to quell that. Soldiers were seen patrolling different city points and other districts on Saturday. But defying curfew, thousands of protesters, both students and non-students, took to the streets on Saturday with processions, blocked roads and highways, and torched tires and planks of wood across the country and in different parts of the capital. You see how that decision escalated everything so much more because you summoned the fucking army? Razaul Karim Roni, a journalist and the editor of the monthly magazine Joban, told Al Jazeera an overwhelming majority of protesters from the area where he lives in Dhaka were non-students. The protest, he said, is no longer confined within students, as general people have joined them spontaneously. As there is pent-up anger among the common people under the autocratic regime of Sheikh Hasina, people have taken these student-led protests as a platform to express their dissatisfaction. Many establishments across the nation, including important government buildings, Dhaka's metro rail, and even a prison in the central district of Narsingdi, came under attack from the protesters. Several ruling party offices and houses belonging to some of its leaders were also targeted. State Minister for Information Mohammed A. Arafat told Al Jazeera that the protest has been hijacked by vested interest. Students, he said, were fighting for legitimate demands of quota reform. More than 50% of government jobs are reserved in South Asia. Sorry, it's so hot. More than 50% of government jobs are reserved in the South Asian nation of 170 million. Protesters have been demanding the abolition of a 30% quota for the descendants of 1971 Independence War veterans as job growth has stagnated. The cost of living has soared since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2019. Ronnie, the editor of the local magazine, agreed that some opposition leaders have joined protests and indulged in vandalism. But he said that the government's characterization of the protesters was misleading. This protest of common people by common people now. This is a protest of common people by the common people now, he said. Completely misread that the first time. Please forgive me. On Saturday, Nahid Islam, a key organizer of the students' quota reform movement, was allegedly picked up by plainclothes police from a house in the capital. Islam's family went to the offices of the detective branch of the police, but his whereabouts are still unknown. I think there is a bit more news on him coming up a little bit later. Just bear with me. So, on the internet blackout that crippled the country, there has been a complete internet shutdown since Thursday, leading to an information blackout and disruption of normal life. Ridwanul Alam, a private sector employee, has been frantically trying to recharge his prepaid electricity meter since Saturday morning, as there is no electricity in his home. Alam first tried bCash, a mobile financial service, to pay the bill, but it didn't work as there was no internet. His attempt to withdraw cash from an ATM was also unsuccessful. I do not know what to do. My home has no electricity amid an internet shutdown, he told Al Jazeera on Sunday. Economic activities have also been completely halted. The customs house of Chattogram Port, which handles over 80% of the country's exports and imports, has not been able to clear any container for the past 40 hours. Journalists are relentlessly trying to secure ways to gather and file news. Muqtadir Rashid, a journalist from the digital portal Bangla Outlook, told Al Jazeera that enforcing the internet blackout is akin to crime now. It's like the government is robbing the people's right to know, he said. This is a must in any democracy. Couldn't agree more. The next article is a Reuters article that was published on 22nd July, titled Bangladesh PM Hasina blames opposition for violence, curfew to remain. It's infuriating. Sheikh Hasina is infuriating. Almost everything she says inflames the Bangladeshi population. She really should not be in power anymore. I think her time has run out, to be honest. But let's get into this. Her comments came a day after the South Asian country's top court agreed to scrap most quotas in a ruling on Sunday. Hasina, age 76, won a fourth straight term in power in January in a national election boycotted by the main opposition party. Why, as the BNP, would you boycott the vote? How was that ever meant to work? Maybe I'm misunderstanding something here, but how was that ever meant to not put Hasina in power when you're the only other political party that has significant power in Bangladesh? I don't get it. I don't understand how these political parties do their dealings. Is it a game? Are they in on it together? Who fucking knows? It doesn't make any sense. When arson terrorism started, the protesting students said that they were not involved in it, Hasina said in an address to business leaders in the capital Dhaka, her first comment since her government ordered a curfew late on Friday. We were forced to impose a curfew to protect the lives and property of the civilians. I never wanted it, she said. We will lift the curfew whenever the situation gets better. Hasina blamed the main opposition, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and the Jamaat-e-Islami Party and its student wing for the violence that started last week. The parties did not immediately respond to requests for comment, but critics, including the BNP, have previously accused Hasina of authoritarianism, human rights violations, and crackdowns on freedom of speech and dissent, charges her government denies. Of course they would. Why wouldn't they deny that? Late on Sunday, protesters gave the government 48 hours to meet a string of new demands, but most appeared to be obeying the curfew on Monday in cities that had seen regular demonstrations after a high court in June reinstated the old quotas. Thousands were injured in protests that turned violent last week as security forces fired tear gas, rubber bullets and sand grenades to scatter the demonstrators. Tanks were seen stationed at several places in Dhaka on Monday, while armed security patrols directed the few motorists who ventured out. There were no reports of violence in the country, officials said. On specifically Monday. The new demands from protesters included a public apology from Hasina for the violence, restoration of internet connections, and the reopening of campuses. The anti-discrimination student movement also called for the resignation of some ministers and university officials and the dismissal of police officers deployed in the areas where students were killed. We are giving an ultimatum to the government to fulfill our 8-point demand within 48 hours, one of the movement's leaders, Hasnat Abdullah, told reporters. He did not say what would happen if the government did not meet the demands. The government did not immediately comment. Dhaka police said that they arrested 516 people for involvement in destructive attacks. Police spokesperson Farooq Hussain said 3 policemen were killed in the violence and more than 1,000 injured. Normalcy will return within 1 or 2 days, Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan told reporters. The government issued a notification that extended a public holiday declared over the last 2 days to Tuesday. Protesters said some of their leaders were detained, including Nahid Islam that we mentioned before, who told the media he was picked up by 20 to 30 people claiming to be police early on Sunday morning and taken to a room where he said he was tortured until he lost consciousness. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying on the streets, he said. Dhaka police denied detaining him. Again, of course they would. Bangladesh's $416 billion economy, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, has faced struggles after the COVID-19 pandemic. Costly energy imports after the war in Ukraine shrank its dollar reserves, which fanned inflation and pushed the government to seek a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. Just going to take a small drink break. My throat is getting quite parched. Let me know if this is like boring also. I'm just doing this because it helps me be informed as well as inform my audience. So just leave your comments, guys. The next article is actually an opinion piece, and it's the article that I'm kind of the most excited to read. It is by a gentleman called Shahidul Alam, and he is, give me a second, I want to read it directly from Al Jazeera. His name is Shahidul Alam. He is an internationally acclaimed photographer, writer, curator, and social activist based in Bangladesh. He co-founded the photo agencies Drik and Majority World. So that's who he is. And he wrote this opinion piece through Al Jazeera on the 23rd of July, 2024. And it's titled, "In Bangladesh, Protests Are No Longer About the Quota System." So, he starts off by listing the demands that we've been talking about through the majority of this video. A list of demands by students has been circulated in an underground press release. 1. The Prime Minister must accept responsibility for the mass killings of students and publicly apologise. 2. The Home Minister and the Road Transport and Bridges Minister, the latter is also the Secretary General of the Awami League, must resign from their cabinet positions and the party. 3. Police officers present in the sites where students were killed must be sacked. 4. Vice Chancellors of Dhaka, Jahangirnagar, is that how you say that? Jahangirnagar, and Rajshahi universities must resign. Number 5, the police and goons who attacked the students and those who instigated the attacks must be arrested. 6, families of the killed and injured must be compensated. 7, Bangladesh Chhatra League, BCL, the pro-government student wing, which is effectively the government's vigilante force, must be banned from student politics and a student union established. 8, All educational institutions and halls of residence must be reopened. 9. Guarantees must be provided that no academic or administrative harassment of protesters will take place. That Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina publicly apologizes for her disparaging comments about the protesters may seem a minor issue, but will surely be the sticking point. This Prime Minister is not the apologizing kind, regardless of what she does, regardless of the allegations that she has rigged elections, regardless of the fact that corruption has been at an all-time high during her tenure, regardless of the fact that more than 100 students and other protesters have been murdered by her goons and the security forces, regardless of the fact that she has deemed all those who oppose her views to be Razakars, collaborators of the Pakistani Occupation Army in 1971. There is certainly not anyone in the negotiating camp who would have the temerity to even suggest such a course for the Prime Minister. There is a Bangla saying, "You only have one head on your neck." The ministers do the heavy lifting. They control the muscles in the streets and manage things when resistance brews. The ministers are high-ups in the party, and apart from the difficulty of finding suitable replacements, discarding them would send out the wrong message within the party. Vice-chancellors and proctors having to resign is an easy one. These are discardable minions. The perks are attractive, and there are many to fill the ranks. The police being dumped is not as easy, as they provide some of the muscle, but friendly fire does take place. Compensation is not an issue. State coffers are there to be pillaged, and public funds being dispensed at party behest is a common enough practice. The demand to ban BCL and associated student organizations in Dhaka, I can't say that word, Jahangirnagar and Rajshahi universities is a sticking point, as they are the ones who keep the student body in check and are the party cadre called upon when there is any sign of rebellion. It is a vigilante group that can kill, kidnap or disappear at party command. For a government that lacks legitimacy, these are the foot soldiers who terrorize and are essential parts of the coercive machinery. Educational institutions being reopened is an issue. Students have traditionally been initiators of protests, which, with such simmering discontent, this would be dangerous, particularly if the local muscle power was clipped. The return of independent thinking is something all tyrants fear. The cessation of harassment is easy to implement on paper. It is difficult to prove and can be done at many levels. Removing the official charges will leave all unofficial modes intact. Of all these demands, the apology is the least innocuous, but perhaps the most significant. It will dent the aura of invincibility the tyrant exudes. She has never apologized for anything. Not for her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, setting up the Rakhi Bahini, the paramilitary force which rained terror on the country, not his setting up of Baksal, the one-party system where all other parties and all newspapers except the 4 approved ones were banned, not the numerous extrajudicial killings and disappearances and the liturgy of corruption by people in her patronage during her own tenure. An apology to protesting students, while simple, would be a chink in her armor she would be loath to reveal. Ironically, her father and the Awami League led the resistance against the Pakistani army during the genocide of 1971. The revolutionaries have now become our new occupiers. They insist Bangladesh is still a democracy. But now, the body count is impossible to verify. I try to piece things together from as many first-hand reports as I can. Many of the bodies have a single, precisely targeted bullet hole. Pellets are aimed at the eyes. International news, out of touch as the internet has been shut down and mobile connectivity severely throttled, says deaths are more than 100. Those monitoring feel that these numbers are a significant underestimate of the dead and missing. Government news report even fewer. Staff at city hospitals are less tight-lipped and can give reasonably accurate figures, but not all bodies go to hospital morgues. An older hospital in Dhaka did report more than 200 bodies being brought in. The injured who died on the way to the hospital are not generally admitted. Families prefer to take the body home rather than hand them over to the police. Bodies are also being disappeared. Police and post-mortem reports, when available, fail to mention bullet wounds. The body of my former student Priyo was among the missing ones, and we were eventually able to locate him. A friend took him back to his home in Rangpur to be buried. Constant monitoring and checking by activists resulted in the bullet wound being mentioned in his case, though a deliberate mistake in his name in the hospital's release order was overseen by a police officer attempted to complicate things. Fortunately, it was rectified in the nick of time. Getting the news out has become extremely difficult. This piece is going out through a complicated route. I have deleted all digital traces to protect the intermediaries. The entire internet network has been brought down. A junior information technology minister has said that this is due to the unstable situation. Helicopters fly low, beaming searchlights downwards. There have been reports of shots fired at people. Tear gas and stun grenade shells become lethal when dropped from a height. A student talks of a body lying on the empty flyover being dragged off by the police. A friend talks of an unmarked car spraying bullets at the crowd as it speeds past. She was lucky. The shooter was firing from a window on the other side. A mother grieves over her 3-year-old senselessly killed. A gory report of a human brain congealed on the tarmac is a first for me. The curfew has resulted in rubbish being piled up on the streets. The brain will be there for people to see, perhaps deliberately. The raid at 2:20 earlier this morning in the flat across the street was also in commando fashion. The video footage is blurry, but one can only see segments of the huge contingent of the Rapid Action Battalion, RAB, heavily armed police and others in plain clothes. They eventually walked out with one person, perhaps an opposition leader. Armoured personnel carriers prowl the streets. Orders to shoot on sight have not quelled the anger, and people are still coming onto the streets despite the curfew. There is the other side of the story. Reports of policemen being lynched and offices being set on fire are some of the violent responses to the government-led brutality. Then there is the impact of the protests on the average person, as most working-class Bangladeshis live day to day. Their daily earnings feed their families. As a prime minister who desperately clings to a position she does not legitimately have the right to, and a public who have been tormented enough to battle it out, they are the ones who starve. Private TV channels vie with the state-owned BTV and churn out government propaganda. As I watch members of the public complain on one, I am unable to forget all the average people I spoke to, the rickshaw drivers and even the fruit sellers with perishable goods, who expressed solidarity with the students. Their immediate suffering, though painful, is something they are willing to accept. That was a heartfelt opinion piece, and I'm saying it's an opinion piece because Al Jazeera put that disclaimer on this article themselves. So it is an opinion piece by Shahid Al-Alam, but I think it really does speak to exactly the kind of horrors that's currently plaguing Bangladesh at the moment, which is why I really wanted to include it. There's a few more article clippings that I want to get to, but I'll read some headlines as well, just so you can understand what's been happening in the last few days. So AP News released an article 4 days ago, now 5 days ago because it's the 31st, but I'm just going to read this as if it's the 30th of July because that's when this was researched. So 4 days from the 30th of July, 4 days ago, AP News released an article titled "Bangladesh Crawls Back to Normalcy After Violent Clashes That Killed Nearly 200 People." The Economic Times released an article 5 days ago, or 5 days from the 30th of July, titled "Over 6,700 Indian students have returned to India from Bangladesh." The Guardian: Bangladesh student protests turn into mass movement against a dictator, and that was released 3 days ago. an Al Jazeera report released on the 29th of July, so a couple of days ago, the title read, "Shot in the Eyes, Victims of Bangladesh Protest Violence Face Dark Future." So from Dhaka, Bangladesh, within the sterile walls of the National Institute of Ophthalmology and Hospital in Bangladesh's capital Dhaka, a somber scene unfolds. Dozens of men, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty, sit in silent anticipation. Some shield their injured eyes behind dark sunglasses, others wear white bandages on one or both eyes. One question hangs in the air. Will these men ever see the world clearly again? They are the victims of pellet injuries, both survivors and reminders of the deadly clashes between protesters seeking job quota reforms and the security forces of Bangladesh that engulfed the nation of 170 million people for nearly 2 weeks this month. Among them is Muhammad Anik, a 24-year-old salesperson from Madaripur, a central district some 150 kilometers or 39 miles away from Dhaka. There is a less than 50% chance that he, Anik, will get his eyesight back, said a duty doctor at NIOH who requested anonymity. There were several injuries in his 2 eyes, and we had tried our best. Last Monday, Anik was heading home from work when he got caught in a street clash between protesters and police. Before he could figure out what was happening, a pellet struck his face. He fell to the ground unconscious and exposed until bystanders intervened and took him to the hospital. Now he finds himself amid the dozens of young men at NIOH, their futures shrouded in darkness. The next section of the article reads, "Hundreds of patients of pellet gun injuries." The NIOH has treated nearly 500 patients in the last few days hailing from various districts, including Dhaka, all grappling with severe eye injuries. Hospital records reveal that at least 278 of these individuals also sustained wounds to other parts of their bodies. Muhammad Shamim, a 10-year-old who worked at a motorcycle workshop, sustained pellet injuries in both eyes during a clash between police and protesters last Friday in the Mirpur area of the capital. Doctors have said he will never fully recover his vision. "My son's future looks grim. What am I going to do with him?" lamented his father, Muhammad Idris. NIOH's director, Gulab Mustafa, confirmed the shotgun pellets used during the anti-quota protests were the primary cause of the injuries. In cases where the pellet embeds itself in the retina center or is forcibly ejected upon impact, partial blindness becomes the tragic outcome, he said. Researchers who looked at pellet injuries to protesters in Indian-administrated Kashmir have previously found that when fired at close range, the pellets lack sufficient time to disperse, resulting in a concentrated cluster that moves at incredibly high speeds. This concentrated force transforms the pellets into projectiles akin to handgun bullets, capable of piercing deep into soft tissues, particularly the eyes, causing extensive and irreversible damage. The devastating impact of pellet guns on eyesight hinges on the velocity and the distance at which the pellets are fired, the study explained. The severity of these injuries has prompted international condemnation, with Amnesty International calling for a ban on their use for crowd control in Indian-administered Kashmir a few years ago. This next section is subheaded Violation of UN-issued guidance. So the United Nations has warned against using metal pellets like those expelled from shotguns in law enforcement, arguing that they are inherently inaccurate and often violate the principles of necessity and proportionality. Bangladeshi police and security forces, however, have resorted to using 12-gauge pump-action shotguns loaded with cartridges containing these very metal pellets, a number of security analysts told Al Jazeera after analysing several photos and footage. Al Jazeera telephoned and sent messages to Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan and several top officials from police forces, but received no response. Salim Mahmood, Secretary of Information and Research of the ruling Awami League Party, told Al Jazeera that he had to check with the police and paramilitary forces where any lethal weapon was used against the protesters. Meanwhile, the US-based human Rights Watch has accused Bangladesh's security forces of using excessive force during the protests. Their findings reveal that the use of live ammunition, tear gas, stun grenades, rubber bullets, and shotgun pellets to disperse demonstrators. Amnesty International has also raised similar concerns. Those who sustained eye injuries during the recent anti-quota protests, along with their families, claim that the police used indiscriminate force, firing at them without restraint. Rakibul Ahsan from the southern district of Barisal was part of the protests. A fourth-year statistics student at BM College, Ahsan was on the streets with his classmates last Tuesday when he was shot in both eyes. Doctors have not assured him of a full recovery. We were protesting for a legitimate cause and we were shot at for it. There is no justice here, Ahsan lamented. Suman Mia, a mason from Madaripur who shared a hospital ward with the salesman Anik, was also struck by a pellet in his right eye. But unlike Ahsan and like Anik, he was not involved in the agitation against the government. He was simply heading home from work. Despite a surgery, doctors couldn't save the eye. His vision is lost. My brother wasn't involved in any protests. Why was he shot? Who will be held accountable for this? His sister, Lipi Akhtar, asked. Last few headlines for me to read, and then I'll leave some final comments. I'm hoping that the noise outside isn't just drowning me out. But a headline from Bloomberg a day ago says that shutdowns may cost Bangladesh $10 billion, industry group says. Amnesty International published an article 22 hours ago. Bangladesh, end punitive mass arrests and arbitrary detention of student leaders and protesters. The New York Times released 29 minutes ago. Bangladesh accuses tens of thousands of crimes in sweep to break protesters. That's all my news for this week. Things in Bangladesh have certainly escalated since I last covered the topic. I'm hoping that there aren't further media and internet blackouts, because that will probably make the situation way, way, way more dangerous. I'm very, very perturbed to hear that military are just roaming the streets. I don't really know what to say. If you have experiences of your own, of course, only do this if you are safe. Please feel free to share your experiences in the comments. I know from the last video there's been a lot of new Bangladeshi viewers, so if you would like to share your stories, this page is an open record. You're more than welcome to leave your experience. Just please promise me that before you do that, you make sure that you are safe to do so. Okay? I don't want anyone's blood on my hands, but I understand that I'm kind of in a privileged position because I live in the UK. Like, no one's going to persecute me for covering Bangladeshi news. And I don't know. I just feel so helpless because I don't really know what else to do but cover it. With limited resources at the moment and maybe like not of the highest quality, it's the best I can do at the moment. And I do hope it does something to help, because I don't know. I don't even know what the options are. I saw one petition last week. I don't know if that's going anywhere. I don't even know if that petition will do anything. All I can say is that the student protests were completely justified. The Bangladeshi government, whether it's run by the Awami League or whether it's run by the BNP, is extremely corrupt and extremely politically violent. I cannot stand either of those parties. I think that I've made that clear throughout this video, but I just want to say that you should absolutely support these students that are protesting, as well as the people who have now also risen up as a result of the students protesting and as a result of the violent reaction the government had to students, children, protesting. Thank you for watching. I know this is a long video. Please share if you would like to, and hopefully I'll see you next week, and hopefully I won't have like a 17-page document describing horrors that are continuing to happen in Bangladesh, but at the moment I'm not so hopeful. Goodbye.